Hello, I'm Sarah Montague from The World at One.
And I'm Evan Davis from PM.
Now, yet again, it was the NHS that won out in yesterday's spending review. Health services are becoming a larger and larger part of what the government does. And that's partly because as a society, we're all getting older. The government has also reinstated most pensioners' winter fuel payments at a cost of £1 billion. Is it fair on young people who are paying more and more of their earnings to support a generation who benefited from much cheaper housing costs and, of course, who haven't been saddled with university debts? Evan, where are you on this? Are boomers ripping off the young people?
I think there is something in the there's a social injustice, an intergenerational injustice argument. And I tend to think of it as that boomers were a bulge in the population. So this is really post-war birth rates were very high. And so you get a big bulge. And among the bits of luck that the boomer generation had, which was that they didn't have to fight a Second World War, they were there for a period of kind of big economic growth and catch up as economies recovered after the war. Among the luck they had was they were a big cohort. Now, let me tell you why I think this is important. If you're a big cohort, there are a lot of you who are working, when you're of working age, to look after a relatively small number of pensioners above you. And that's good, you know. Mm-hmm. When you get to when the boomers all retire, you then have a smaller cohort of workers who are working their guts off to look after a very big proportion of pensioners, and that is a crucial bit of luck for the boomer generation.
Arguably, it shouldn't be a bit of luck. It should mean that yes, they were lucky while they were young, but as they got older, we're unlucky now because there are fewer people to pay for us. But instead, everything seems to be contorted, or the argument would be contorted around looking after this boomer generation, who are also, of course, benefiting because they're living longer.
I mean, look, there's clearly something in there. So let's just be clear. Let's imagine you're a household and the kids look after the grandparents, and there's no state pension or tax or pension system. It's a sort of traditional thing. It would be nice to be among 5 kids who are looking after the 2 grandparents rather than the only child looking after the 2 grandparents. So that's the argument that you want to be part of a bigger cohort.
Well, except if there was only one child, you would cut your cloth according.
Exactly. And then the second part of the argument, and it's a sort of separate part of it, is the second thing that the boomers have is, and being a large cohort, is they have a lot of political power because there are a lot of them. And then on top of that is the sort of shocking data on the difference in voting turnout between older people and younger people. And so
there's one other thing we should add.
You do end up with, the political system veers towards the interest of the older, bigger generation.
We're also in a world where newspapers, and I'm talking actually almost print here as much as anything, have an outsized influence on politics. And newspapers are largely read by the elderly, actually. Yeah. And so perhaps if policy was determined, if young people voted, then newspapers probably wouldn't have such an influence.
Yeah. Look, all of this is true. And I think it does suggest it is very difficult for politicians to make decisions that are, if you like, against the interest of the old. And we have to be very careful about this because in any system, the working population are looking after the elderly population, the non-working retired population. And it doesn't matter whether the young people, the workers, do it via paying for their parents to live directly, or whether they do it via paying taxes that go to their parents and grandparents to live, or whether they do it via a pension system in which the parents save, and they save money, the money's invested in buying corporate shares, and then the workers have to work to pay the profits that go to the parents. Always, however you do it, workers are looking after retired people through any vehicle, and you need to be careful that you're not stifling the workers so much that they can't do the job, and that you kind of kill the enterprise and you kill the incentives for the workers to work. because then you get into a very dark place. If the workers don't want to work because everything they earn is just going to the pensioners, it's not in the interest of the pensioners or the workers. And that's what you've got to avoid. That's why you do have to be careful.
And we haven't mentioned, of course, housing costs, which, I'm not effectively, it's a separate element that one needs to feed into this, which is that young people are having to pay so much more. There's a startling figure, I think, for the boomer generation. You could buy a house at 4 times average earnings. For young generation now, it's 8 times average earnings.
That is, and I never quite understand why it's got so out of kilter. But yeah, absolutely. Now,
that's partly because we haven't kept up with.
Yeah, and partly there's a whole lot about interest rates were higher at some of the periods when the boomers were buying, but there was also a lot of unanticipated inflation when a lot of boomers were buying, and that wiped out a lot of their mortgage actually. So there are all sorts of things. There were bits of luck around that, but no, the housing is another element of it.
But it's one that feeds into it, doesn't it? Because if you are spending all your money on rent, you are not going to think about having children, which is what you need to have in order to solve the problem to
pay for your pension.
Exactly.
Yeah, to work when you're paying. Now,
so what is this? Where should policymakers look to?
So I think there are 2 areas where policymakers need to look. One is getting the investment rate up, because if workers are looking after pensioners through one means or another, what you want to make sure is those workers are as productive as possible. And that means them having as much equipment and tools as possible to be productive. So what you really want to happen is you want the workers to have robots that are working alongside them to be helping them create income for the retired population. And so what you want in an economy that is moving towards a very big cohort of non-working retired people is a high level of physical investment in making productive capacity so that the economy has, so that the workers have the ability to produce. So that's one. I think that's a very important one. The other, this is the one that I'm throwing this out, Sarah, for people to think about or discuss. I'm not advocating it, is you do have a massive amount of housing wealth in a large section of the boomer population.
Yep.
And they're going to die. That I think we can agree on that. And that housing wealth will probably be passed down to their offspring. Now,
will that make the nation more unequal?
Well, what it will really do is entrench a certain inequality that was based on the luck of the housing market in the 1970s and 80s, 90s. It'll pass that inequality on to the generation below, because there'll be those who have parents who are rich in housing and those that don't. So you might want to think you might want to think there are complications about wealth tax, but you might want to think about, is there a way as government you could grab a bit of that housing wealth when the people living in those houses die and disperse it across the working population in tax cuts rather than just letting it go to the people who are the inheritors. Now, it's not a very popular idea among those
because if
who
you
have
think
rich
about
parents.
even when you think about sort of social care, the nation cannot even conceive of the idea that actually if you own a house you could use those savings. Well, you are actually at the moment.
Yeah.
They're saying that it's not fair that you can't pass your house on.
Exactly. So these are not popular ideas. But just before we get stuck into this, the boomers have had it all too good and the boomers, are spoiled. I think there are a couple of other things. The one that I hear a lot from younger people is the injustice of university fees. And in my day, we didn't have to pay anything. In their day, they're saddled with tens of thousands of debt before they start work. I mean, that is a really interesting one. But remember, in the day when it was free, not many people went to university. And when I say to the younger people, let me offer you a world in which university is free, but only a third of you are going to go to university and the others are not going to go, would you like that world? They don't seem very keen to say, OK, we'll go back to as it was in the 1970s when a few people went for free.
Quite interesting, because my experience with young people is, apart from it, there was a particular cohort I think were really hard done by because they hadn't sorted out the finances properly. But now I think a lot of people just accept it.
Yeah.
It's like the US system. It's just the way it is, and they just sort of discount it. But this idea, there was a very a very interesting interview you did the other day with Liz Kendall when you were challenging about this sort of disparity and whether it's fair on young people, this idea of paying for pensioners to have their winter fuel
When there were
payment.
better other ways of reducing poverty. There
Yes.
are other people who are in more need than these pensioners get
You had
winter fuel.
Paul Johnson say to you it wouldn't be among the top 100 things he'd do to alleviate poverty. But her response was that she didn't accept that there was this intergenerational rivalry, because actually the way families work is you all pull together.
Yeah. And there's obviously some truth in that. Obviously, there's also the argument that if it is about families pulling together, yes, the parents will probably leave the assets to the kids. The parents will be using some of those assets maybe to subsidise their kids going to university, or yes, all of that. But of course, that does mean you do entrench the inequality in the older group straight into the younger group, because there are people with better off parents and worse parents. Do you know what I actually think, Sarah? Part of what worries me about the boomer. The power of the boomers is actually the economics clearly matters, but I think what we need to worry about is how a society doesn't become too stuck in its ways and all. It's more a kind of cultural, social argument, and I detect among some young, more sort of libertarian-minded younger people that they're just sort of fed up. It's the NIMBY argument, really, isn't it? It's that you're living in the countryside, you're retired, you're quite well off, and you don't want a horrible construction site nearby. It's actually less about the train being pushed past your house. It's more about you've only got another 12 years. You don't want 6 of them to be in a building site while they build the railway. And you just have to be careful that society doesn't become a bit sclerotic, that young people want to come up and they want to change things and they want to build things and do things. Yeah. And if it's all like, no, we can't do that and we can't do this.
So you would say to older people, just get over yourself.
It's a mindset. It's a mind. We don't want to become old in our mindset, even if we have to sort of navigate our way through some of these complicated economic.
But even in something like
transitions.
let's make it easier for childcare, because of course now there are many more couples, both working, who are being crippled by childcare costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is, and now of course, be great use for some of the older people. This is the grandparents looking after the kids, makes it much more affordable if you can can find the parents or the retired to look after the kids. But I mean, that's the childcare is, well, that's a whole nother topic, but it is part of that is you need workers to look after the kids if you're going to have a working population. So it's just...
you need carers to look after the old people, unless we go back to that family that Liz Kendall was talking about, and we all do it for each other. Evan, thank you.